an article was posted from Reddit, which was study men who treat women the same as they treat other men without benevolent sexism / female privilege are seen as overwhelmingly sexist by both men and women. Now, this is the headline of a study that found this to be true. And in response, somebody who is extremely dildo, left libertarian, polyamorous, but also those are only identities that he claims because in reality he is a loser autist that actually wears a dress half of the time because he thinks that's a social statement. He has $6,000 worth of debt and he doesn't know how he could ever possibly pay it off.
It is a social statement.
We may even be going... Yeah, okay. So he says in response to this is interesting, but I'm not sure that it proves much. At worst, from the feminist POV, all it proves is that we need to change how people regard how the two genders interact and what is seen as benevolent and what isn't. And our friend says, I'm sorry, but you're such a It's like, what would the cuck male feminist in a dress say? And you say it. And then he says, this is the best part. We used to have a system where men and women treated each other differently. Patriarchy. But no, you say we need feminism, and now we have it. Oh, wait, men need to lower themselves even more to make sure women aren't offended by equal treatment. Your whole reproductive strategy and ideology is based upon the lowest common denominator. You're left-wing because you don't want to work. You're libertarian because you're a degenerate. You're poly because you don't want to take the lead in a relationship, and you're a cuckold. You're a feminist because, again, you won't take responsibility. You're basically a fucking worm. Everything's about you, and how you operate works around getting the most for the least, and fuck anyone else who gets dragged into your sewer of a worldview. God. That was such an epic verbal beatdown. I don't know how anybody possibly recovered
Well, then
that.
his shitty responses to that, like...
I can't. Yeah.
His response.
I don't know how much more we can go without identifying an individual in question. But I mean, if you want to keep going with it, go for it.
Well, I just want the tone he takes to come back from that is so like above it all, and I accept these things about me. What makes you think they're so? It's just he takes on a tone that he's above the fray of the ideological debate that's like within this verbal beatdown, as if because
he doubles down on the self-deprecation. In order to like defend himself from any attack, in that I don't like you can't hurt me because I have already got no self-esteem, and this is a higher position.
Yeah.
And actually, this is a very good segue into the topic that we have been kind of teasing for a while. If you guys don't mind, if I sort of jump into it,
do it.
Okay, this is an extremely good segue into the topic that we've all been reading Kevin MacDonald's. Culture of Critique. Some of us have gotten through more of it than others. I still have a little bit of it to go, but there's already some general theses of it that we can discuss. Now, for those that don't know, Kevin MacDonald is essentially an evolutionary psychologist. He works at, I believe, Southern California State University. I'm not exactly, I think that's right. But he was basically, just some background for anybody that doesn't know to give the whole sort of picture of this thing. He was basically he just was a PhD in that field, teaching his classes and sort of was interested in social psychology and what he calls social identity theory, which is sort of something that he developed in conjunction with, I think, some other people. And so immediately he became attracted to the Jews because he was like, wow, so here we have a very cohesive subgroup that strongly identifies with itself and yet remains a part of sort of Western society. How have they maintained this cohesion through the centuries? So he studied them, and he released a book series that ended up being called The Culture of Critique series. That is the title of the third book. The first book is simply a study of sort of Jewish in-group strategy. Mm-hmm. And that book actually is very neutral in tone. All of his books are neutral in tone. That book didn't get accused of being anti-Semitic because he, in a way, you could actually see it as praising Jews because you're like, look, here's this group of people that has maintained their unique identity through all the pressures of the last 2,000 years, even they say 5,000 years, really 2,000, but whatever. But anyway, so he's like, yeah, that's impressive. So he wrote his theory on sort of their social evolutionary strategy. But he then wrote, what was the name of the second book, Bulbasaur?
The first book is A People That Shall Stand Alone. Second book is, oh my gosh.
Separation and Its Discontents.
Yes.
And that is about integration of Jews into wider Western society. So, about the time of post-Enlightenment, around sort of, I guess, 19th century, Jews started actually coming out of their shtetls and becoming integrated into Western society, and they took roles as intellectuals and merchants and bankers and things like that. And then the third book, he is actually the one that we're all reading, is the most, I think, important and devastating, and something that I really just urge everybody to read. And I'll say this: if you drop me an email in the TRS contact, I will hook you up with a copy of the book somehow. I don't want to say how, because it could be illegal. So but I'll make sure you get a copy of the book. And we've all been reading it, and essentially it outlines the history of Jewish political involvement in the 20th century in various movements, and essentially it's called the culture of critique because these are essentially countercultural movements. And he identifies basically some characteristics of the kind of intellectual movements he's talking about, and the characteristics are that the members of them they don't have to be all Jews, but it has to be essentially being a Jew is considered the reason why the intellectual is a member of this movement. The conclusions of the movement are essentially pseudoscientific. They're not verifiable in any way, and they serve a pro-Jewish agenda. So identifying movements like that and linking this back to the individual who was sort of very much a self-attacking and considering that to be a more moral position, and then reacting against someone who is criticizing his low self-esteem, his basic self-debasement as being morally inferior, for valuing things like self-actualization, sexual prowess, success with women, material success, etc. Basically sort of alpha features, masculinity, essentially, those kind of features, for valuing that's seen as sort of, he's trying to switch it around and essentially characterize that as pathological. And that's something that comes out of, in chapter 6, I believe, or is it chapter 5 of Kevin MacDonald's book, is about the Frankfurt School of Social Research, in particular a review of a book by the Frankfurt School of Social Research, which is a group of Marxist intellectuals that started in Frankfurt, Germany, but in 1940 they were actually 6 weeks after Hitler took power. He shut it down. And they all came and they founded the New School for Social Research in Manhattan, which is still where this sort of thing goes on. And essentially, one of the main bodies of work produced by this school, which is the main intellectuals were Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Erich Fromm, and a few others. The main body of work was this book called The Authoritarian Personality, which essentially was a psychoanalytic, pseudoscientific, pretend study of so-called authoritarian personalities. It was based on questionnaires where authoritarianism is considered a priori bad. It's considered linked to anti-Semitism. And all the features of authoritarianism are essentially what MacDonald calls socially adaptive behavior. So in other words, what we would just call good behavior, right? Like, as a man, you behave masculinely, you have agency, you want to go out and provide resources, you want a loyal woman that is going to be sexually loyal to you, to produce children with, you want to command resources, you want to have a home, and you want to be loyal to your family, your traditions, and your country. Okay? All of which are essentially socially adaptive, good behaviors, are good reproductive strategy behaviors for human beings.
If I could interject,
Go ahead.
If people wanted to see how this works, you may have taken this test in the past. It's called the F scale, and that's actually derived from this study. I've taken it.
Scale, basically.
Yeah, it's the fascism scale. And if you take the test, all of the questions tie directly into this. Do you identify with your nation? If you take it, it raises your fascism score, and like that.
And it's interesting because the reason this is sort of considered part of the whole general thesis of subversive Jewish intellectual movements that are sort of like the purpose of them. I mean, what the purpose of them isn't entirely clear. The result of them is to essentially allow for Jews to use in-group strategies that benefit Jews while decrying those in the greater culture. And that is a beneficial strategy for Jews in particular, but it's debilitating when it becomes accepted by the wider culture, as Frankfurt School psychologizing of politics has become accepted. I mean, he talks about very much like the idea that any sort of bias, any sort of negative stereotyping of outgroups, essentially racism or anti, any kind of negative view of an outgroup. You don't like Muslims, you don't like blacks, you don't like Jews, you don't like Latinos or whatever, is considered a pathology. Yet Jews retain among themselves extremely negative,
very xenophobic,
and not even just the sort of the Talmudic stuff from the other book, that Hoffman book, but even secular Jews retain extremely negative stereotypes of what they perceive to be sort of like the provincial goyim.
Even conservative Jews. I mean, we have one kind of in our distant circles that is identified as a conservative Jew, and he has those he has that pathology.
The sort of identifying any kind of sort of lower middle class white, sort of, basically Alex McNabb would be identified as a vile, low form of life.
I thought we were all conservative Jews. What happened?
I don't know.
Yeah, actually, we suck Jew dick.
We're all conservative Jews around here.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
That's why I do
actually
this. I
wanted to get back to this. Is actually kind of a serious point. It's very fascinating, and this is just one facet of the whole book. I mean, I think we're going to cover the whole thing eventually, but it's a large body to absorb, and it kind of really is an enormous whole when you read the whole book, when you see the various ways.
It's enraging. I haven't come anywhere near finishing it, but it's just fucking...
Yeah.
It's
Your
like
Jimmys will not be
like
not be in good shape.
Everything that you hate about like modern politics has its roots in 20th century Judaism, basically. Made all this crap up. All this liberalism, all these things, and I haven't gotten. Don't spoil it for me. I haven't gotten to the
from
section.
The Frankfurt School, they do the study, and they basically interview all these people, and it's supposed to be random. And a certain number is a girl that comes from an abusive family, and the father's a drunk. And the way they present that is she questions authority. This is good. She comes from a good family because she's not tied down by any of these preconceptions. And then they talk to people. It's like,
to be clear, this woman scored low on the F scale.
Right. She scored very low on the F scale. I mean, and it's funny. It's like, oh, well, the thing is they're wanting to pathologize something. They're actually pathologizing the left because all the people that end up agreeing with them are people from broken homes, people that have psychological issues, very blatant psychological issues, and they twist it.
Yeah, they twist it to be actually healthy. So it's like someone who doesn't doesn't identify strongly with their own sex, isn't heavily attracted to the opposite sex, essentially has sort of like bad sexual relationships, has like distant family relationships. It's like because they can admit these things, because they can say, yeah, I didn't get along with my parents. I don't really support Christianity or American patriotism because if my parents had those values, they were emotionally distant, essentially abandonment issues, sexual pathology. But because people report this, and also those people also, I mean, this is sort of the corollary to that was that these people reported very socially liberal views. So they reported, no, I'm not racist, I'm not anti-Semitic, I believe in the human family and things like that. And that's, of course, the view that from the sort of Jewish strategy that they're pursuing, they want the Goyim to have that view. They want the
brotherhood of man.
They want you to believe in sort of universalist, individualist egalitarianism because everybody is equal and equally special, and we're all people, and nobody should be denied, and we should all be part of this one big happy family. And the only thing that is actually going to ruin that is the majority culture. So Christianity, American patriotism, capitalism, or fascism in Germany.